again, my little yarnivores and spiderettes. Fiber Spider back again with a continuation of the Tesselated Forest Filet Blanket, and we are on row 6. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you're doing well. Alrighty, so starting right in with a chaining up of 2 for our first double crochet, turn the work, and 4 more doubles for a total of 5. And again, be careful, do not go into this first stitch going into the next one. So that's 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Now we're going to, actually, it's sort of like, in a stair-like formation. So instead of going straight up like we did before, we're going up and over, making sure that this post is in alignment. So chain 1, skip 1, and double. So our eyelets are going in a nice diagonal to create our tree shape. Now, from here, we need a total of 27 double crochets, counting this first one. So 26 more, because we have our first one here. And again, we really don't need to count per se. It's good to count. Oh, yes, yes, yes. It is very good to count. But if you can read your work, you don't need to count the actual number of stitches. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just doing my double crochets across. And when we reach our eyelet over here, that's when we produce some new eyelets on either side. I'll show you what I mean by that. But for those of you that like a count, it is a total of 27 doubles. Either or. Okay, so we are getting there. Just a couple more. Okay, more than a couple. I like to fancy myself as being a quick stitcher, but okay. All right, one more. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 25, 26, and 27. Perfect. Okay, so now we need an eyelet on either side of this eyelet. So when you did your 27, chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next with a double, and then double into the chain space because we're filling it in, and then double into the next double, chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next with a double. So we're going out now, So basically the base of this tree, it's going this way and this way, and then this next tree is going this way, and the other side will go the other way. So it's sort of a branching out, if you will, of eyelets. So let us continue on for an additional 26 doubles, because we already have our 1, which counts as the first ones. We've got 2. We just need 25 more for our 27. No problem. And we're going to be doing this for each tree. And as we keep going, the sides, the branches, the pointy bits, they will become more and more pronounced as we keep going. Right now, it's sort of skeletal in its framework. I understand that, but like I said before, you got to start from somewhere, and we're starting from the ground, working our way up. And eventually, you will definitely be able to see, yep, we are making a tree. Okay, yep, we're almost there. Just one more. Okay, so from here, chain 1, skip that double, going into the next, double into the chain space, and double into the next double, chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, and we have our 2 eyelets once again. Okay, so 27 doubles. So we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. Okay, so now we can have our eyelets going still in the diagonal. So chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, and then 4 more double crochets for a total of 5. So I've got 1, and 2, 3, 4, and last but not least, 5. All right. And so that is the end of row 6. Alrighty. Okay, row 7. Start by chaining up 2. Turn your work. And so in the last row, we started with 5 doubles. Now we're going to start with 7 doubles. So skip that first one, going to the next, and 5 more for a total of 7. And then we'll create our first eyelet. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1 more for our total of 7. Chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. Okay, now for this row, it's 7s and 23s. And what I mean by that is we just did a grouping of 7. Well, let's do a group of 23, then a group of 7, then a group of 23, etc., etc. So we already have 1 and 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. And again, you really don't need to count per se, but it is a total of 23. And then we're going to continue having our eyelets shift along the diagonals that we started them off on the last row. And of course, my yarn wants to tangle. Vermicious canids. There we go, that's better. All right, let's keep going here. Yeah, so once you have 23 doubles, I'm going to create a new eyelet and then do a grouping of 7, another eyelet, another grouping of 23, and so on and so forth. It's really quite easy once you get the hang of it, like with most things, really. And we are approaching, yes, we are, we're getting there. Okay, a couple more. All right, there we are, actually. Okay, so from here, going to chain 1, skip 1, and double. So that's the first of the 7 that we need. So that's 1, 2, 3, tangle. Of course. Hang on a sec, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Occupational hazard. All right, so we have our eyelet and our 3. We just need 4 more. So 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. So as you can see, our eyelets are starting to branch out diagonally very nicely. All right, so we did our 1 right here. We need 22, excuse me, 22 more for the total of 23. And then we will have our next set of eyelets branch out. Separated by 7 doubles. And we are getting there. Okay, almost. 1 more. There we go. Okay, so chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. So goes at an angle like that. Perfect, perfect. Okay, so I need 6 more. So 2. Woo! 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next with the double. All right, so we got our diagonals of eyelets going on, and we are on the last of our trees here. But of course, we have to end with an eyelet and 7 doubles, just like we started. So work our way across Nothing to it, really. Okay, almost there. Pull out just a little bit more yarn. Not enough to get tangled, I hope. Okay. One more. Okay, so chain 1, skip a stitch, double into the next, and then 6 more doubles for a total of 7. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 7th goes into that top of our first chain 2 that we had done. And there you go. All right, so that is the end of row 7. So as you can see, it is starting to come along. I didn't lie, I told you it would, but we have a long ways to go, so let's keep going. Okay, row 8. So going to start off again, of course, with our chaining up of 2 and add an additional 8 doubles for a total of 9. So I've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, now we need to continue on with our eyelets. So chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, and an additional 18 stitches for a total of 19. So we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Okay, so going to have our branching off diagonal eyelets continue on in the same fashion. So from here, after doing your 19 doubles, chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, and we're going to continue to have this middle section in between the trees grow out. So we did our 1, now we need 10 more for a total of 11. So I've got 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. There we go. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next, and 18 more for a total of 19. Just like we did here, we're going to do the same thing with this next tree, tree number 2. So right now it's like the last row, it was 7s and 23s. This row, it's 19s and 11s, if that makes sense. Right now we're doing a 19, and the in-between the trees, that's the 11. So we've already got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next, and then 10 more for our grouping of 11. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next, like so. So I've got our diagonals going on just fine. All right, so we just need one more grouping of 19. Now, because we began with a grouping of 9, we have to end with a grouping of 9. But right now we need to get through the 19 first. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, woo, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. My yarn is really misbehaving today. Naughty, naughty yarn. So we have what? 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Okay, groovy. All right, so from here, again, continue the eyelets. So chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next, and then 8 more for a total of 9. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 for the end grouping. All right, so that is the end of row 8. All righty. All right, row 9 is a bit of a treat. For those of you that like to count, it is disturbingly simple. We are going to start, of course, with our chaining of 2 and turn our work. And we are going to start with a total of 11 double crochets. So we already did 1, we need 10 more. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Now here comes the easy part. We are going to continue doing our eyelets, of course, but the number of stitches in between for this row, it's going to be 15 all the way, ending, of course, with 11. We started with 11, so we're going to end with 11, but in the middle, it's going to be 15. So going to chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, so that our eyelets are continuing on their diagonal journey. And so we have our first double. We need 14 more for the total of 15. And then it's going to be an eyelet, and then another grouping of 15, and so on and so forth. Pretty much for the rest of the row, with, of course, the exception of the last grouping, which will be 11. So it ain't all bad. And of course, if you're not into counting, you can just sort of follow the direction that the eyelets are traveling. And we are almost there already. It's a beautiful thing. Okie doke, one more. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 15. Perfect. Okay, so from here, chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next, and 14 more for our total of 15. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next for the next eyelet. So as you can see, things are progressing. Yes, they are. All right, so pull out a little bit more yarn and continue on your merry way. Now, you may be wondering about the name of this. Well, Tesselated, that's because the trees all fit together. But I decided to call this the forest fillet because, I mean, yes, I do celebrate Christmas, but not everybody does. And I wanted this blanket to be non-denominational. Trees, trees are trees. It could be a Christmas tree or it could be a beautiful, forest, whichever. I like trees. I like forests. I like the woods. Okay, and so we have already reached. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 15. Perfect. So chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next, and 14 more for our total of 15. Yeah, so that's the reason why I decided on the forest fillet, because it doesn't need necessarily a time of year. I mean, yeah, if you want to think of it as a Christmas tree, you know, to each their own. You could also, if you're so inclined, you could embellish your blanket with some little appliques to look like ornaments or whatever. I would not suggest adding lights to your blanket. That might be dangerous. I don't know. You know, maybe if they're battery operated, but I don't know. I just like the simple look of a fillet pattern. I think it does its own justice. Also, I mean, as far as the yarn that you use, I would say, you know, use whatever it is that you like, but I would suggest, this is personal preference, of course, use a solid color. That's just me and my personal preference. I would say let the fillet work do the talking. Otherwise, the colorway could be too distracting. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 15. Perfect. All right, so we're almost to the end here. Actually, we are on the last tree. And if I'm not mistaken, pretty soon we are going to start the next tier of branches. And that can be a little bit confusing, so of course, you know, I'm going to walk you through it naturally. It's what I do. Okay, so almost done with this section. Of 15 stitches. One more. There we go. So chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 15. Perfect. All right, now we began with 11, so we need to finish with 11. It's very important. So we already have the 1 right here. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Perfect. Okay. So let us proceed. Let's keep going. Alrighty. All right, row 10. Now, like with some of the other rows, this one has a trick as well. It's 7s and 11s. And we are going to be starting the next tier of our tree, you know, because we have, this is the bottom tier. Well, we're going to start the next tier right now. So start off by chaining up 2, turn your work, and so this is our first double. We need 6 more for a total of 7 doubles. So skip that first one, going to the next. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now you're probably wondering, Craig, what are you doing? We need to finish the diagonal. Well, that's because we're going to be creating a new tier. So we're going to create 4 new eyelets here. So chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. I will get it. I will get it. There we go. So that's the first. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip the space going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. And so this right here is how we're going to continue our diagonal, but also we're going out this way, and we're going to continue the diagonal this way. So we did our 7 right here, and then our new group of eyelets. Well, like I said, it was 7s and 11s. So right now we have a grouping of 11. So we need 10 more. So I've got 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And now we're going to do a new grouping of 4 eyelets. So chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip the space going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. So we've got 1 grouping, 2 groupings. All right. And we are in between the trees right now, so it needs to be a grouping of 7, because we did our 7 right here, then an 11. Now we need a 7. Okay, so we already have 1. We need 6 more for the grouping. So that's 2 and 3 and 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, new grouping of 4. That is 4 eyelets. So chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. So we've got our grouping of 4. And because this is the actual tree that we're working on, it's a grouping of 11. So we need 10 more. We've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay, so now we need another grouping of 4 eyelets. So chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip that chain going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch going into the next. So we've got our 4 eyelets, and because we're in between the trees, it's going to be 7 doubles total. We already have the 1. We need 6 more. 2, 3, excuse me, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Good. Okay. Need another grouping of 4 eyelets. Chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. Chain 1, skip that space, going into the next. Chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. And we are on the actual tree, so we need a grouping of 11. Okay, so we already have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay. So we have our 11. Now we need another grouping of 4 eyelets. Chain 1, skip a stitch, going into the next. Chain 1, skip that space, going into the next. Pull out a little more yarn. We need 2 more eyelets. Chain 1, skip a stitch. Chain 1, skip a stitch. Okay, so we've got the 4 eyelets, and we're going to end with the grouping of 7. We already have 1, so we need 6 more. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and double into the last one to make 7. Ta-da! All right. And that, my dears, is the end of row 10. All right, my dears, so that concludes the second part of our tutorial, our crochet along. And so next part, we're going to be dealing with this second tier and work our way up even further. So listen, guys, as always, thank you so very much for joining me today. I hope you're liking it. And of course, if you are, please give a little thumbs up button down below. You know I appreciate your appreciation. Yeah, I do. And of course, stay tuned for more because we will continue on with the Tesselated Forest Filet in the next part. All right, so you know what to do until the next time, right? I want all of you to stay inspired, stay caffeinated, stay stitching, and please stay safe. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now, everybody, and have a great day.